Hi, this is Shep Altshuler, publisher of TimeSharing Today. Welcome to this broadcast of TimeSharing Today Radio, featuring news and views of owners and industry professionals. Today we are being joined by timeshare owner Jeff Bellin. Jeff has written several informative articles for TimeSharing Today, and we will be discussing his ownership experiences as well as his thoughts about being a proactive timeshare owner. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, Shep, thank you so much. It's great to be on here. It's an honor and a privilege, actually. I love the opportunity.
Yeah, we appreciate getting perspectives from timeshare owners, and you're very much of a proactive timeshare owner or have an interest in the industry. So how long have you been a timeshare owner?
Been an owner since 2001. Got roped into a presentation on our honeymoon. It was a Radisson in name only in Kauai, and we're offered all kinds of fun stuff and free stuff, and we went and we were really impressed and purchased.
Where do you currently own?
We own at the Pahio Kauai Beach Villas, which is currently managed by Wyndham, but is not a Wyndham property. And also at the Samoset Resort in Maine, which is a fantastic resort. And then at the Harborside in Edgartown, Massachusetts, which is another wonderful resort. An unusual resort, but a wonderful one.
What makes it unusual?
It's a converted motel, so the rooms themselves have no kitchen facilities. They maintain them as motel rooms. What they did is they took what was the kitchen, what was the main kitchen area, and turned them into a common kitchen facility with about 8 stations, full stove, stovetop oven, huge refrigerators, lots of tabletop areas to prepare food, and up to 2 or 3 families or couples, whatever, will share a refrigerator. So everybody's cooking together and sharing things, and you have an extra cup of sugar, I'm not using this corn oil right now, that kind of thing. You want some wine, so it's a very communal experience, which can make, if you're looking for a private experience, it's harder to do that, but you get used to it, and it's a waterfront property with, a boat slip as part of the timeshare if you have a boat. I don't. But to be able to vacation in Martha's Vineyard for just the cost of the maintenance fee, which is very low, is fantastic. You could essentially for, maybe the cost of the maintenance fee would get you about a night and a half of rental at a hotel on Martha's Vineyard.
So there is a value to owning there, particularly if people have an interest in vacationing on the vineyard. So overall, that ownership with its little oddities has worked out well for you. Is that correct?
It's fantastic. I mean, for us, both the Samoset in Maine, it's mid-coast Maine, and the Harborside are both within, a couple hours, 3 hours travel. And so we can just go in our car and stick our luggage in, and we drive, and we're there. And so that's is a kind of a no-brainer. Discovering Martha's Vineyard, which actually we discovered it on a trade, an initial trade. I've been living in Massachusetts for 35 years or so, and had never been to the islands. And Martha's Vineyard is a real island experience, and it has 6 different towns, and each town has a completely different flavor, and we just fell in love with the island experience. It's a wonderful place to go and vacation, particularly if you're into hiking, walking, a real natural sense of living, and in addition to there being boutique shopping and a couple more upscale towns, but and then these magnificent captain's mansions. So it's a variety of experience, but then to do it so cheaply, because it's a wickedly expensive island to vacation on. Restaurants are very high end, they're very expensive. Hotels are very expensive. You're generally looking at a minimum during higher season, if you go during higher season, of $350 a night. So that's $2,400 to stay, and maintenance fees around $400 or so. So it's, to us, it's one of those great values. I think it touches on all the check marks of a timeshare to buy into. You want to go back there. It has very good value, and actually it's one of the few timeshares where the resale value's actually gone up And that's very unusual because, as you know, you don't purchase timeshare as a real estate investment per se. You purchase it as a vacation investment to try to keep costs down on your vacationing. But as very wealthy people are buying up waterfront properties and turning them back into essentially estates, into your homes, there are fewer and fewer places to rent as a hotel. And at the Harborside Inn, you have the option, if you don't want to use part of your week or all of your week, to let the hotel rent it out. And the hotel keeps 25% of that money, and you keep 75%. And the rooms, again, think about, $300, $350 a night, and then you get to, if you rent it out for 2 nights, you're keeping 75% of $700. That's more than your maintenance fee that you just paid for. So even if you just came for a few nights and rented out the rest, you could actually make some money. But the resale value, now we bought in the secondary market, we could sell it for more than what we paid for it back, and we bought it, I think, back in 2005 or 6. So that's rare, but that's how good a buy it was.
That is a rare exception, not necessarily the rule, but being able to buy cheap and sell higher is a bit rare in the industry today. So tell us a little bit now about Samoset and why that's appealing to you versus the appeal that you found over on the Vineyard with the Harborside.
The Samoset is a Victorian-era golf resort. It was built as a golf resort. Around it was, I think, similar to a high-end golf course. And then you build a high-end facility around it. So this, during golf season, is very busy with a lot of celebrities, a lot of high-end people. It's mid-coast Maine. You have Camden and Rockport and Rockland. You have, Rockland has the Farnsworth Museum, which houses the Wyeth collection. So it's kind of an upscale area with fantastic restaurants. But what I say is that we didn't fit the check mark is because we actually ended up trading in at one point for the first week of the year. So we're talking about the first week of January. Not necessarily ideal, but most of the community is a year-round community, so most of the restaurants are still open and the museum's still open and whatnot, and there's a lot of antique shopping. And yet the views are absolutely extraordinary. They're exquisite. They're a Penobscot Bay, and it's just the most beautiful view out your window. And the timeshares are spacious. They're wonderful, and they have 2-level one-bedrooms, and the deluxe ones are at the tips of the buildings that are closest to the water, and they have wraparound porches and wraparound windows. So you have this absolutely huge picture window of this incredible view of Penobscot Bay and the moonlight that shines down on it. It's just, we've seen bald eagles fly past our window. I mean, it's just really exquisite. So for, again, a 3-hour drive, and after the cacophony of the holiday season, just to be able to get away, drive 3 hours, and you may have to deal with snow, but even there, you can, within your nice, comfortable, large room, to be able to see the snow coming down. It's just very, very, very romantic. Other times of the year, though, you need to pay a fee. If you want to walk the grounds, you need to pay the golf fee, which is reduced for hotel guests and timeshare guests, but there is a fee to actually walk the grounds. But during the off season, you can walk the grounds to your heart's content and go snowshoeing or cross-country skiing on them, and it's just on the course, and it's just absolutely stunning. So, for us, it works. It doesn't work necessarily for everybody.
Now, do you have traditional condo-style amenities within the units?
Yes, the kitchens are relatively modest in that it's a stovetop and a dishwasher and a toaster oven. That's what you got. Oh, and there's also a microwave. So you have a microwave, stovetop, dishwasher, toaster oven. That's what you got. So at least there's kitchen facilities, and we take advantage of it. Particularly, lobsters in Maine are the best lobsters, and that time of year they're pretty inexpensive. And so there's always somebody who's a truck nearby that out of the back of their truck they're selling lobsters, and you get a couple of lobsters, you take them back, and we usually run lobster races on the ground before we put them into the pot. but it sounds mean. But you're cooking up a lobster. That's how kind are you anyway to the lobster? Anyway, we do take advantage of the kitchen facilities, and yet there are some of the best restaurants, probably even better than some of the ones I've had in Boston.
So you have right now two great destinations in New England, Martha's Vineyard and Samoset Resort. And touch a little bit now upon the Pahio experience. You've written about it in Timesharing Today, but just capsulize how your experience and perspective there at that resort. For
anyone who's never been to Hawaii, particularly other than Oahu, Oahu is very, very commercialized. But if you've been to any of the other islands, you'll fall in love. The weather's spectacular. The air is clean. The water's warm. The water's clean too. The fish is just out of this world. Thin fish you get at the restaurants. Very expensive too. Kind of like Martha's Vineyard kind of expense. But to fall in love with the place. So it was very easy to say on our honeymoon to go, yeah, I could see ourselves coming here. Now, it's expensive to fly to Hawaii from the East Coast, and also a long trip. It can be anywhere between 13 and 18 hours. So we decided to buy on an every other year basis there. But this resort, this is a very, I think, a unique resort. And again, anybody who's never been to Hawaii, there's a law that keeps ownership of the beach far back from the beach. In other words, all beachfronts have to be public and cannot be owned by a hotel. So if you go to a Hyatt or any other beach resort, and Poipu is on Kauai is the kind of the main high-end resort area, other than on the north side of Kauai where all the golf resorts are. There's a lot of golf courses up there, high-end ones, as well as the surfing capital of Hawaii is probably the north side of Kauai. But even when you go to these high-end resorts, and the resorts are set very far back from the water because the actual beach frontage has to be public for anyone. At Lihue, though, in this resort, the beach is actually quite rocky. It's very volcanic, and so it's not a great swimming beach. It's actually a very cool walking beach, lots of tide pools and whatnot. But the public doesn't seem to have wanted a lot of that beach, and they didn't settle aside a lot of it. So the oceanfront units, which there are 3, are actually as close as during high tide as probably about 75 feet away from the water's edge, or from the actual beach, which is where the water comes up. Maybe it's about 30 feet to the beach. So you're right down at beach level in these oceanfront units, and so close to the water, and you just hear all through the night and the day. You just hear the churning of these waves over this volcanic, beachy area. It sounds like you're listening to a washing machine sans the motor. You're just hearing the water sloshing around, and the sound is fantastic, and of course the views is fantastic. And those oceanfront units, just to step back, were a premium to pay. So when you had the option of buying in, you could pay a premium to get an oceanfront unit, and only those who essentially bought a deed for the oceanfront units are supposed to be able to use them. So we decided to do that because we thought that when we do come back, those are the units we want, the ones that are right on the ocean. They're so spectacular. And we looked at a number of timeshare just after the fact. We just, you go riding around, you see a timeshare resort, and you go poke around. There is no timeshare resort I've seen where units are that close to the beach. So it's an incredible property in that regard. It's modest in other regards. It's not as, you go to some of the incredible resorts, and Hyatt isn't exactly a timeshare resort, but say even Marriott has a timeshare resort in Lihue as well. And it's spectacular. It's huge, humongous. None of the units are that close to the water. You'll get other amenities, and you'll get just the sheer grandiosity of and beauty, and like sculptures, and the pool is just a humongous pool with sculptures and fountains and whatnot. You won't get that in the Pahio, but what you get are well-tailored grounds, very pretty. Its own pool is small. There are some barbecue grills there, but the nice thing is they have a relationship with that hotel next door, which When we stayed there, it was a Radisson. Then it was a Hilton. I don't know what it is now. It keeps changing the names, with an affiliation. But people who stay at the Bahio can use the facilities over at the hotel next door, and the pools are much more extensive with a restaurant, and they have some boutiques inside their place. So I mean, it's actually, if you combine that experience of owning there and being able to use the facilities next door, it's a very nice experience. The amenities in the units, we own a 2-bedroom, 2 full-size bathrooms, a full wraparound kitchen or wraparound counter which looks out onto the water, the lanai. If you can imagine the 2-bedroom running parallel to the water's edge as opposed to perpendicular. Some places you'll get that little piece of balcony. We've been to resorts, timeshares like this, and then the unit runs deep so they could stack more side by side. Here, the units run parallel to the water so that the balcony runs the whole length of the unit, and you have a separate dining room, living room. It's an open plan, but they divide it in some way where you have a dining room with a dining room table and a huge living room, and then the bedrooms are both at the back and they actually face a parking lot, but the kitchen is off of the dining room, kind of recessed back, but it looks out onto the window, which, again, the incredible view of the water. So, you leave, you don't even need air conditioning in those units, because you just let the trade winds blow the air in and you hear the sounds of the water. It's spectacular.
So you have ownership in point systems and in the week system.
Right.
And with each of the resorts, tell us a little bit about how are those resorts governed? Are they owner-controlled properties where the owners are actually running the association, or you're part of the Wyndham system, so you have the developer that's there and providing management? How is the governance actually controlled at each of these resorts?
Well, there are 3. Actually, that's a great question, and it shows that the answer is that it highlights that there are kind of different ways of governing or different systems. Let's just start with the Harborside Inn, which is its own entity, and everything. It is closely run by the owners. The board is made up of very active people. Even one of them just puts it upon herself to buy the utensils when things need to get bought. New pans need to be replaced, or cups need to be replaced, or whatever, spatulas. She goes and buys it herself. She'll go to whatever supply place and just buys them and gets reimbursed. So though the board's very, very active at the Harborside Inn, and given that there's no profit motive in that particular regard, we're not talking about a management company that is overseeing and trying to make money off of the management of it. It keeps the cost down, and aside from some lawsuits, various lawsuits, including the town wants to take away some the privacy or some of the land away from the resort, wants to have a public walkthrough, and we're fighting that one. So there are certain kinds of lawsuits that happen, and those have probably been some of the bigger costs that we've had. But the fact is that we've kept costs down to about 400 or so per week, which is fantastic for at Martha's Vineyard week. That's an amazing little amount of spend to stay there. Now the Samoset is where you start to run into a little bit of parties that have somewhat different agendas. The Samoset has kind of an umbrella ownership. Okay, it's the Samoset Resort. By rules, the board has to have some representatives of the hotel. So the Samoset Resort comprises a very large high-end hotel that's open mostly all year round, but not completely. The last couple of years, they've shut down for a couple of months to save some money. And the timeshares, which are open all year round. By the contract, there have to be some members of the hotel who are like the board of the hotel itself, a general manager, whatnot. I think there are like 3 spaces on the board, have to be on the board of the homeowners association as well. So there's always a little bit of, can be a conflict because they're not always the same, they don't always have the same motives. You know, caring for the timeshares may not be necessarily in the interest of the cost of the hotel itself. So just to give you some example, there could be some conflict of interest. However, it's strong enough that the timeshares are kept up very, very well. I'd say they're appointed, some of the better appointed timeshares that I've ever been in. So they have a feel of being on the very nice side. You know, on maybe not absolute luxury, but maybe just one cut below absolute luxury. Certainly never shabby. I've never seen them in, you know, since I've owned, and that was probably 2003. I've never seen them shabby at all. So overall kept well, and again, fees kept down. So clearly, you don't have a company managing it whose interest is making as much profit as they can. It's essentially, you have owners of the timeshares, you have the Samoset, you know, the ownership, and Samoset now has become part of I don't even know the brand, but it's become part of a larger brand. They also own the Wentworth in New Hampshire. But the brand is a very upscale brand, and so their commitment is certainly to keep things running well, not necessarily profit as the ultimate motive. They want to make sure their standards are kept up. So happily, you know, maintenance fees have been kept down there as well. So I've been very, very happy. So again, I think, whereas I'm not sure if the owners are as active, but at least you seem to have a board and at least a hotel that has enough interest in common to keep things running well and keeping fees down. All right, so that's number 2. Number 3 is the Pahio in Kauai, the Kauai Beach Villas. It is not a Wyndham property, but Wyndham wants people to think that it is. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when Pahio decided to, which was an independent group of owner and members of the board, and they own about 3 or 4 resorts throughout Kauai, both from the South Shore and the North Shore, and they decided to hire Wyndham to manage the company. And they're going to charge you some amount of money to do so, and they are there to make profit, but also they want to do your service well in order to, keep having you use them as a resort manager or a condo manager or a home manager. So we hired Wyndham, and Wyndham did a couple of things that were not so good. One is, it wasn't until after the fact, because it wasn't until I started to make friends and talk to people on the board and ask why maintenance fees were going up so much and what was the state of the resort, because there wasn't a whole lot of updates being done on the online internet page, and so we weren't getting that much news about it. But things were apparently starting to get ratty. Wyndham was charging more or finding expensive versions of mediocre stuff. So it seems this way. But one thing is, when you're on a system where they are getting paid 10% of the maintenance fees that are collected, then the more cost that it can generate for maintenance fees. In other words, if they raise the maintenance fees, if they find a way to go from $400 a week to $800 a week or to $1,200 a week, they're now getting 10% of $1,200 a week rather than 10% of $400 a week from everyone. So there is an actual incentive to make things as expensive as possible. And when the board started to go over some of the choices that Wyndham were making, they were making expensive choices, but not necessarily best choices. They weren't necessarily the best quality, but they might see equivalent quality, but they would go with a more expensive version of that same equivalent quality. And overall, the resort was, the rooms were going down in quality. They were going down in maintenance. The maintenance fees were going up. They just found that they weren't managing very well. Additionally, it was something that I discovered when I went there the last time I was there, and what I did write about in the article in Timeshare today, is that they tried to sweet-talk me, Wyndham, into giving up my deed to the oceanfront unit, saying that I could, for a fee of $7,500, they would take my deed and then give me entrance into the wonderful world of Wyndham's vacation resorts. So I'm thinking to myself, one is we hired them to do maintenance on, just to run the resort and do maintenance on it, and they're trying to enroll people into their vacation resorts, which is a separate company, separate division of Wyndham. I thought there's something wrong with that. There's a conflict of interest in that. But the more I thought about it, I thought, how are they going to guarantee that I can get back into the oceanfront units? Particularly if they, let's say, if mine was the only one they bought, I would be then competing with how many people in vacation, Wyndham Vacation Resort, products, whatever, or members of that, trying to get into Kauai Beach villas. And now I'm one of, hundreds of thousands, whatever, as opposed to I'm guaranteed with that deed to have an oceanfront unit. And then they're asking me to pay them $7,500. So I'm talking about there are so many things wrong with that particular group of qualities or circumstances. And so I started to investigate more and more, and as a result of it, started to not only write in Timeshare Today, but I started to communicate with the board, and I particularly made friends with the president of the board, and started to share what I was finding and the conflict. And they started to think about it too and realize there was something wrong. And the more they started to investigate, the more they realized that Wyndham was not doing well by them. So they're actually undergoing that resort is undergoing an effort to try to change the management company. So don't get fooled if Wyndham says it's the Wyndham Kauai Beach Villas. It's not. They own just a small percentage of the resorts. They have been successful in getting a certain number of people to hand over their deeds. But it's not a Wyndham resort. It just happens to be, Pahio is paying Wyndham to manage it, but that may not be the case all that much longer.
What I'd like to do is conclude this interview with your letting our owners know about the importance of investigating not only the resort in terms of its quality, its maintenance fees, its upkeep, but investigating resorts from the perspective of governance. And how can an owner or a prospective owner thinking about buying into a resort go about finding out the nitty-gritty of what's going on relative to governance and control, now that you've gained that experience over the years at the three properties at which you own?
Well, here's one of the things we know that in the United States to keep in mind, that you have 3 days to rescind a contract. So if you're going with a developer, say, and obviously a developer, I don't know if the board has been established at that point, depending on probably how early you are in the sale, in the progress of the resort. But know that you have 3 days to rescind at the very minimum, some states probably more. But that does allow you 3 days to go and investigate and find out, and then to cancel if you decide, no. However, I would say that particularly when you comes into the second-hand market where you're buying on the aftermarket, find out who the board members are. See if you can. Board members should be available. If not every owner wants to be available to be talked to. At the very least, you might, if you're trading into a resort, and while you're at the resort, you're thinking, oh, this might be a good resort for me. I think I'd like to buy here. Make sure you talk to the owners. Try to find board members. It's very likely that there'll be at least a board member there during that week, and you can talk to them about the experience, talk to them about the maintenance fees. Make sure you find out about the history of maintenance fees. Pretty much every resort I've ever been to, I've ended up talking to owners and asked about their experiences, and it's given me great perspective on how good or not so good certain aspects of my ownership are. But I will say this, that in terms of the Pahio, if I hadn't questioned that, if I hadn't used my brain and my gut and my instincts and went, there's something wrong with this that they're doing, and started to investigate, there wouldn't have been a change in management, because I was the one that really kind of crystallized it for the board there. And I'm not on the board. I was just an owner taking an interest. What it does is it highlights how important it is to take an active role in the interest of how your resort is run, and not just be a person who just pays a maintenance fee and just hopes for the best.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. Your insights were very helpful, informative, and I want to make sure that our listeners know that when you have an owner-controlled board of directors at a timeshare resort, that these dedicated individuals work on a voluntary basis, and they sometimes need to get input from the owners to see whether they're doing, the right job, whether there are issues that should be addressed. So why don't you just say some closing remarks about that?
Well, first of all, I can add, because having talked to people on boards, that they sometimes feel like they're pulling teeth to get the other owners to participate. So if they hear from you and they know that you're interested in helping out, or just the fact that you're listening to them, boy, that makes a big, big difference, and it really gives them a boost of energy. So it's important to give them kudos, pat them on the head when they're doing a great job. But of course, if you have some issues or concerns, that you also speak up, and if you're particularly willing to help out in some way, that's also a boon to them as well.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. My God, it was just, what a pleasure.
And this concludes this broadcast of TimeSharing Today Radio. Whether you're an owner or an industry professional, your opinions, suggestions, and experiences are all very important to us. So if you'd like to participate in a future broadcast, or if you'd like to suggest a topic for TimeSharing Today Radio, please send an email to staff@tstoday.com. So until next time, happy timesharing.